This is a series of lectures about the urinary system. It's going to be broken down into 3 parts, the first of which is going to talk about the gross anatomy. But before I get to that, I want to tell you what the overall function of the urinary system is. Usually, the urinary system and the excretory system are used interchangeably because it's the major player in removing wastes from our body that aren't carbon dioxide that we exhale, or the bilirubin, which is the red blood cell waste product from our blood that the liver and the spleen are busy removing when the red blood cells are being broken down. So this is all the rest of the waste products. When we filter that blood, the kidney actually gets a little carried away and takes more out of the blood than it's supposed to, so that we end up taking materials back into the blood, and then ultimately we're producing urine that is going to be removed from the body. Here's a GIF file that is showing you how the filtration is being done here, and then things are being resorbed back, and then our waste is coming out of the bottom here. Where are the kidneys located? They are located on the posterior abdominal wall. They're considered retroperitoneal, and when you look at this picture at the bottom, I'll zoom in for you, is that here's my kidneys back here, but I can see this white border, which is the peritoneum, and because it's behind that peritoneum, we're calling that retroperitoneal. The bladder and the urethra are going to be how the urine exits the body, but then in the male, we're going to see also that in the urethra for the male, it's going to be what I consider a 2-for-1 special, because there's going to be a reproductive nature to the penis as well, and using the urethra. So looking at the posterior abdominal wall, our major organs are going to be our kidneys. 2 of them, a right and a left. From the kidneys, we're going to have tubes that are called ureters that are going to drain urine to the urinary bladder. And then from the urinary bladder, it's going to exit through excuse me, the urethra. Now, some of you might be upset that ureter and urethra are very similarly spelled. The difference between urethra and ureter is that urethra has an H and an A in its spelling. And I like to remember that, well, if I have H and an A, well, that's ha. And if I do another one, that's ha-ha. Well, that's laughing. And you can tickle your urethra with a feather, but you can't tickle your ureters. They're too far up. Weird, but maybe it'll be helpful. This is a diagram from your SDLs. What you can notice is that I've added, using 2 different highlighters, I have colored all of my arteries pink, and I've colored all of my major systemic veins blue, and then my ureter and my bladder I have colored yellow, just so that I can distinguish the structures better, especially when I'm labeling my arteries versus my veins. So I recommend you do that. Looking at the kidney itself, the outside of the kidney has a thick fibrous capsule that is going to protect it. And then the kidney is going to be broken into 2 regions, and you have to think of it superficially to deep. Kind of like if you think of an apple. The apple has the peel on the outside, that would be the fibrous capsule, and when you bite into the apple, you'd be biting into the cortex, which is going to be the more superficial, fleshy component. And then the medulla is going to be the core. And in the core, well, we don't necessarily eat that, but in the core of the medulla, that's going to be here and here. So the cortex is going to be this outer ring, and then the medulla is going to be everything deeper. So there's a lot of structures within the medulla. The medulla is going to be made up of these pyramids, and we call them renal pyramids. Renal is the word for kidney. And for our renal pyramid, much like any other pyramid, we have a base and a papilla, which, well, I suppose in pyramid words you would call it the apex, but we're going to call it the papilla for the renal pyramid. Renal columns are going to be extensions of cortex-like tissue that are going between the pyramids. And at the tip of the renal pyramids, the papilla, we're going to have these tubes that are considered part of the collection system. And the first portions are called the minor calyces. One calyx, multiple calyces. And those minor calyces are going to fuse and form a major calyx. And then all of our major calyces are going to fuse together to form the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis is going to exit the kidney and continue as the ureter or the ureter, delivering the urine down to the bladder. As stated just before, the ureter is the continuation of the renal pelvis. They are also considered retroperitoneal, meaning that they would be found, you'd have to peel the peritoneum, the parietal peritoneum, off of the back of the abdominal wall to find them. They are lined with something called transitional epithelium. Transitional is going to be multiple layers, but there's something about this most superficial layer that is different than like a cuboidal, in that as the bladder fills with urine, that superficial layer of epithelium has the ability to flatten and stretch. And then when the bladder empties, then that superficial layer is able to puff back out again, almost like one of the memory foam pillows, is that it's going to puff back out for you when the pressure is gone. But we're going to start seeing that in the ureters. They're about 30 centimeters in length, so if you bust out your typical ruler, which is about 30 centimeters, they're going to go from where your kidneys are located down to where your bladder is at. The bladder itself, for a male, is going to be found here between the pubic symphysis. Remember, that's the bony part that you, or the solid part that you feel at the base of your zipper, and then the rectum. In a female, however, it's found between the uterus and the pubic symphysis. So imagine when this uterus has a baby inside it, all kinds of smashing is happening on top of that bladder, which is means that a pregnant lady has to go to the bathroom more often because that bladder doesn't have the ability to expand very much. Most bladders can hold up to a liter of urine, which is your typical water bottle that you buy from a vending machine. There are 3 layers of muscle that are going to be surrounding this bladder, all of which are going to be smooth muscle. And the smooth muscle is going to be squeezing when it's time to empty. Now, you don't want the bladder emptying whenever it wants, so at the base of the bladder there's going to be this internal urethral sphincter. But when this bladder fills, this sphincter is going to relax, which is not going to be very good for you. And so you have an external urethral sphincter that's going to be trained, but we'll get to that in a little bit. In the bladder, you're going to have 2 openings. These openings here are going to be the ureter orifices, so that's how the urine is going to be dripping into the bladder itself. The trigone, well, like triangle, you take the 2 orifices here and then the opening for the urethra, and it makes a triangle, big deal. Importantly, transitional epithelium is found lining the inside of this bladder. Again, it's going to allow it to stretch, and then all of those muscles in that outer layer, this detrusor muscle, is going to allow it to squeeze and push it out. Because I was running out of room in the previous slide, let me show you where these structures are here. We've got the ureter orifices, and those are going to be these openings here and here, where the 2 ureter orifices meet with the urethral opening. It's going to be a triangular space called the trigone, and then you've got 2 sphincters that are going to decide when the urine is going to leave the bladder, and you've got your internal urethral sphincter, which is going to be starting at the base of, or at the neck of the bladder, wrapping around here. There'll be a better picture of this later on. This one is made out of smooth muscle that you don't have control over. And then this is the external urethral sphincter, which is going to be made out of skeletal muscle that you do have control over, and that's the one that gets trained when you are a young child. Once again, in the bladder, you've got transitional epithelium, and that's going to continue down through the urethra, at least in the proximal portion of it. But as you get to the distal portion, it's going to change into stratified squamous keratinized because it's going to be continuous with the skin that is on the outside of the body. And then you've got this portion in the middle that's going to be a stratified columnar. So it's changing from one version to another to accommodate the fact that we're going to a different part of the body. Now the female is only 2.5 to 3 centimeters long, which is significant because if you think about something called a urinary tract infection that's caused by bacteria, we have bacteria on the outside of our body, on our skin. Some of it is healthy, some of it is not. But no matter what, bacteria is going to reproduce by binary fission where it doubles and splits. Well, if you've got these bacteria here, some of which are the unhealthy kind, and they double and split, they're going to work their way up the urethra and into the bladder. If you drink enough water and go to the bathroom often enough, you can flush these bacteria out. But if you don't, then you have a higher incidence of urinary tract infections. And for some reason, I don't know why, but a red cranberry is supposed to help knock out those bacteria in the urinary tract. I don't know why, but food for thought. Now, when we compare that to the male urethra is a 2-for-1 special. And so we have to talk about where that is going to take place, which is going to be right here. It's longer for those reasons, so between 18 and 20 centimeters long, but it's divided into 3 regions. There is an organ just inferior to the bladder called the prostate gland. And the prostate gland is going to make contributions to the semen for the reproductive system, and it's going to have a connection or a release point here. But the name of the urethra that passes through the prostate is called the prostatic urethra. Turned into an adjective, works out well. Then you've got the membranous urethra. The membranous urethra is actually the segment of urethra that passes through the external urethral sphincter. So there's skeletal muscle that is right here, and that's going to be surrounding that chunk of urethra, which is going to prevent any sort of urine to be released. The remainder of the urethra that goes through the penis itself is called the penile urethra. Just like with the female, the internal urethral sphincter is going to be smooth muscle, and then the external is going to be skeletal. Now think about this. If you've ever experienced your bladder being full and you've had to go to the bathroom, but you're not in a position to do so, you probably have felt what I call the pee drop. Your smooth muscle, the internal urethral sphincter, is going to relax and you're going to have a release of urine, but the external urethral sphincter is going to be contracted because, well, you can't go just yet. That's just something to think about. That's it for the gross anatomy of the urinary system. The next segment is going to be talking about how is it that blood is filtered.